Welcome and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Water Connections webinar series. I'm your host, Richard Restuccia, and today we're going to be talking about something that's really important to me, and I'm sure important to all of you as well. You know, oftentimes we talk about water savings, we talk about water saving devices, and we don't ever really follow up on what we've done. Do we actually save water, right? That is the key. We're not here trying to sell irrigation components or smart controllers. What we're really trying to do is save water, conserve water, have a more sustainable landscape. So part of this is to really analyze what you're doing, measure your water use, report the water use, and then manage from what you've learned. And the first step in this really is, how do you measure your water savings? And helping us today, taking us through this, is Stuart Eyring, the CEO of Orbit. Stuart's got incredible credentials, both business-wise and irrigation-wise. He's got a master's from the Wharton School of Business, and he's one of these, I have a lot of guests here. I get guests that are entertaining. I get guests that really understand and know irrigation, water management, and sustainability. Stuart gets both of those things. I think you'll find it very interesting today. We're really lucky to have Stuart here today. So Stuart, thank you. Thanks for joining us today. How are you?
Well, Richard, thanks. It's great to be here again. And I want to say I so enjoyed last week's webinar with Dr. Kelly Cope. That was just fantastic, so informative.
Yeah, she was really good. And again, one of her points that she was making was that it's really important to do multiple things on a landscape in order to really be green and sustainable and to really conserve. And certainly water use was one of those points.
For sure. And I thought there was just some fantastic ideas shared there that it was a much more holistic look than we usually get. And I thought that was just invaluable for me. I learned a lot.
Yeah, it was great. And certainly anybody who wants to see that, who missed it, can look at the hydrorain.com website and look for the webinars, and you'll find that recording there if you want to catch up on Dr. Cope's webinar from last week. So Stuart, I want to ask you right off the bat here, why is measuring your water use important?
It's important because obviously the goal is not to use water, right? The goal, the why behind when we talk about irrigation, supplemental irrigation, is to make up for the deficit that ultimately Mother Nature leaves from a rainfall standpoint, and to be able to make a landscape look great or a crop yield to be a really strong yield.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting point too, that we're not necessarily just talking about landscape water here. I mean, you're in a beautiful landscape. We can see proper use of water in that landscape because of how well it looks. But we're also talking about yields electric use in agriculture as well, reducing that.
Absolutely. It's being resource smart about how we achieve the results that we're trying to achieve, right? In a landscape or in an agricultural setting, or a garden, right?
Yeah. Right. So last month you had us out to your garden and you showed us some of the ways that you were, some of the tools you were using to manage water, as well as some of the devices and controllers. What are you going to show us today? What do you think is important for us to know as far as measuring water savings?
Yeah, great. Well, I thought I would use this yard because this yard, I think, is in its at least 6th season of smart watering, a beehive controller. It's been an excellent test site over the years for us to be able to really then apply learnings to how to get really good performance across a diverse landscape. And this certainly is a diverse landscape. I will just say that I did not design or plant it. I have been very closely involved in the watering of it, but it's designed by my brother, John, and a designer, Emily, and they've done just a fantastic job. The plant palette is a super diverse plant palette, but you can tell it's thriving, and it is thriving on smart watering.
Yeah, and I think I see some maybe some boxwoods and some other plants like that in the background. How much does this plant selection play in your choices when it comes to water?
Makes a big difference. Turf areas are going to be different than boxwood is going to be different than these hydrangea behind me. These are limelights here. Aren't they beautiful at this time of year?
They're spectacular. Wow. They really just light up the whole background. And, I've always noticed, though, I have quite a few boxwoods at my home, too. And I'm always surprised at how little water they actually need if you don't want them to necessarily really grow. So I really watch my water with my boxwoods. And as a result, I'm not having to trim them so much either.
Yeah, they're really actually susceptible to chlorotic rot when they get too much water. And so, yeah, watering a boxwood right is really important. And you are correct that they're really water wise.
Yeah. So, Stuart, take us through a couple of your slides here, and I want to just mention to everybody that we do have the Q&A open today. So we've already got a question in there. That's great. Thank you. And we're going to be scoring the questions today after. And for those of you who ask a great question, and it can be more than one person, we're going to give a beehive hose end timer and maybe some flood sensors as well to those of you that help us out there with some good questions. So keep that in mind for the webinar, and I'll keep an eye on that Q&A.
Wow, I think that should generate some really good questions. That's awesome that you're doing that. Okay, let's launch in, and we will absolutely deliver on the promise of the title of this webinar. I will teach you how to measure water savings. What I want to say though first is, what does a perfect watering system look like? If you just imagine it in your mind, and I've got two extremes here. For some folks, it might be this approach, which is it's all Mother Nature here, 100% rainfall dependent, but not the aesthetic I think that most people are going after. And so I kind of joke with that is that obviously the most efficient landscape is one that is completely native with no supplemental irrigation, but it is probably going to be harder to achieve the desired effect. At the opposite end of the spectrum is this just super uniform system. You could actually achieve this with drip irrigation as well by coming underneath at the root zone. But it's just a great example of where if you move it extremely precisely, all the sprays are super high precision sprays. You could achieve super good uniformity. There's not going to be any wind drift from this because it's in a greenhouse environment, but doesn't exist in the real world, does it, Richard?
No, and I think that's funny too, because you mentioned the drip side of it. It is the other way, right, coming from the bottom, but it doesn't make such a great visual. So this is a great visual to share. The other thing I loved about your first slide too was that is a water saving landscape, but at the same time, what I really like is your landscape behind you, which is a water saving landscape and beautiful at the same time. I think that's the real combination that we're all, trying to hit.
For sure. And as we talk about, what the goals are to different participants in this webinar, there's going to be different approaches. And for those of you who have clients, they're going to have different expectations and desired outcomes for their landscapes. It might be, a garden like this, or it could be one that's hybrid that actually has some lawn area in it. It could be desert landscaping. This would be very appropriate in the Southwest. In the background there, I don't know if that's real or artificial turf, but it's going to be different, obviously, in that climate. Here is an example then of a public space that's going to be larger, and the users of that public space may really desire to have a lot of turf in that area for pets to run, for children to be able to play. And then certainly in an ag environment, the goal is going to be to optimize the health and yield of a crop. And so there's going to be many different situations. And when we talk about how much we save water, it is going to be specific to what we're actually trying to do in that area and what the plant palette is within each zone. That's going to determine then what water savings means.
Yeah, that's I'm really getting this now, Stuart, because on one hand, it may not be um, it may not be that we're racing to get to zero water use, but we're really trying to get to the appropriate water use for whatever we're doing. Right? Certainly, that public space, you want to have that green area. I'm sure on the weekends there's lots of positive use from the public there. This certainly looks like an alfalfa crop to me for feed. Appropriate water use is probably what you're really trying to do.
Right. And then the water use is also going to be really governed by what you're watering with, and the ability to control precision with that, both in terms of where the water's applied, getting it to the place that you want to get it to, and then in the quantity that you want to get it. And I think it'd be fun as we go through these if people want to just comment on how much water use they think each of these application, just range, kind of entails in gallons per minute. So feel free to put those in the comments section, and then Richard, we can just kind of take a sampling of them. So here's a hose end nozzle. This is an example of a hose end oscillator. All right, so first was hose end nozzle, then hose end oscillator. How many gallons per minute does that use? And then we've got a spray zone in a residential area. How much, that's really going to be dictated by like how much total water is available coming through the main line to that home, while still allowing for some domestic use inside. So gallonage there. And then how about in a park setting where you've got a lot of rotors here? You're probably on, I would think, at least a 2-inch line here, Richard. Would you think?
Yeah, that's a lot of rotors there. And man, look at that pressure. You can tell really high pressure from all that misting that we're seeing. And I don't know, 18 gallons a minute nozzles on there. It looks pretty high.
Richard's given us some pretty good clues there. I think he's designed before.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then here's a vineyard application. And so vineyards are typically divided up into what are called blocks, and those blocks are blocks of irrigation. And often they'll not only have an irrigation application, but often there'll be a misting application as well, to keep the grapes cool during very hot periods and prevent spoilage and loss. And so, what would a block of grapes use in terms of water application? And then this is a big center pivot, and this is a quarter mile pivot, and you can see that this one actually has is with corners and end guns. I mean, this is really this allows you to basically irrigate a square field and not have any part of that field not being utilized for really productive crop yield. And so, yeah, wonder what that uses in terms of gallons per minute. And then what I just want to emphasize, again, this is to the point of saying, when we talk about the savings, and we're going to dive super deep into calculations here, so everybody buckle up. We will not spare the details of how to calculate. But I will just say, here's a good old economics 201 curve showing marginal utility and total utility. And this is applying it specifically to water, which is that up to a certain point, we get additional utility from an additional minute of watering. But we do reach a point where more water is not beneficial. And let me just show, and at that point, the utility actually starts to go negative. And let me just explain why. Because this is what happens, and this shows it in the form of puddling, right? But it then also, if there were any kind of slope here, would end up as waste in runoff. But puddling's a particular problem for then this, which again, I'll let you put in the comments. What do you think this is? And I think in my last webinar, I gave away a key to it. And so what would your prescription be for fixing this problem? And I wonder if there's some of you out there who say, well, that's underwatered. Do you think some people might think that, Richard?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the first thing we always, right? Anytime we see a plant or turf not doing well, I think we jump to that conclusion right away. Not enough water, and we turn it up and we turn it on.
Yeah. The irony here is that this, of course, is a case of, do you know what it is, Richard?
Well, it's a fungus that we don't get in California. I know that much. Other than that, I can't be specific.
Good on you. Richard is a master gardener, but he's right. He's more familiar with warm season turf. This is a cool season turf problem. This is necrotic ring spot. And it's actually, the conditions for this are most favorable when the moisture conditions are kept too high in a root zone. And so over time, what that does is it allows those spores to then multiply, and you get this fungus effect. And in its very early stages, this is clear here. You really know what it is. But if you saw this in its early stage, you'd say, oh, that area doesn't look like it's getting enough water. And so the visual signs to many people would be misleading, leading them to put more water on when actually it's an issue of already too much water being applied. And so smart watering and then measuring water savings is around this idea of saying, okay, well, what's the area that I want to water? What am I watering it with? Right? It's going to be very different depending on whether I'm using drip or spray heads or rotors. And then the critical question of what should the timing of that water application be. And now as we launch into the savings portion of this webinar, you're going to see how all those factors come together then to inform decisions about when to irrigate, how much to irrigate, and then that assessment of saying, well, how can I tell if I'm irrigating too much or too little? So Richard, are we ready to dive into some really specific examples?
We are, but we do have a flood of comments coming in that I just want to cover a few right now before it gets too stormy there.
Can you tell I'm
if you blow away, I'm going to be upset. So somebody already got the law of diminishing returns, your economic play there, and related it to what most economic professors talk about in college, drinking beer. So we did see that. And then we've got another customer who's saying, it's really about cutting the waste that's beyond the requirement. So not wanting to necessarily, his comment is, we're not really trying to, how can you save something that you shouldn't be using in the first place, right? Once you go past that water requirement. It's a good point, right? But again, I think what we find is we roll on to people that are using 200-300% of what they should be using, and that's what I wanted to get to right now, Stuart, is what they should be using. How do we know how much somebody should be using?
Yeah. Okay. Great. So let's then launch into, and we're going to talk about theory and practice. And so as we then launch into this, and again, whatever setting it is we're talking about, first there is technology that we can bring to play, and this is just an example of many ways to reach to the cloud to then be able to get access to diagnostics that allow us to measure plant consumption, and then allow us to also then measure how much water has actually been applied in the landscape and compare that to say, okay, zone by zone, how did I do in terms of actually only replenishing what deficit was left to those plants after they used the water, evapotranspiration, and then Mother Nature applied whatever rainfall in beneficial form that got back into the soil. What's that difference? And that's really what we should irrigate. And then the question, okay, measuring how much did we actually apply? So Richard, any questions on the technology?
Yeah, none of the, I just want to say, is it kind of like a savings account, right? Deposits in versus withdrawals, and you have a certain amount of water in the soil.
Yeah. And another way to say it is, are we balancing a budget?
Yeah.
Right. Is that we don't, and the bank account analogy though is good, is that we definitely don't want to be overdrawn in the bank account. And I think, Richard, that's actually a really helpful idea, which is to say, are we thinking about water by saying, how much do I have available to spend?
Yeah. So, and then the other thing is, something's impacting the withdrawals, right? There's a lot of things that impact the withdrawals, some more than others. So, when I think of water coming out of the soil, what are some of the factors, Stuart, that impact that more than others?
Yeah. And so the four variables that we measure as part of the equation that we've talked about before, in the evapotranspiration equation, are the amount of solar radiation. So in simple terms, that's how much sun is hitting that area. The second factor is temperature. There could be a lot of sun hitting it, but if the temperature is very low, the plant is not going to use as much water, right? So there's the temperature element of it. There's humidity. When humidity is high versus low from a relative humidity standpoint, that barometric pressure differential, then that's going to drive a difference in ET. And then the fourth one, and we've talked about this one, is just huge, is wind. So I'm sitting here on a windy day, and remember, kind of our rule of thumb from the formula is that for every 10% increase in wind speed, there's a 3% increase in evapotranspiration. So wind is huge. As you look through the data on your smart watering app and see what the water usage was in a day, what you'll see is the big differences. Temperature is a pretty big driver, but the really big driver is when wind goes from 7 miles an hour to, like today, 14 miles an hour, the evapotranspiration, the plant water usage goes way, way up. Does that capture it okay, Richard?
Yeah, it sure does. Because as soon as you said that, I think about, right, oftentimes we get storms, not rain. And so we get moisture in our soil, but it's still very windy, and you end up thinking, oh, my soil dried out really fast, even though we got the rain. And yeah, that wind that's accompanying that is really
maybe,
contributing.
maybe counterintuitively, but plants do use water on a rainy day.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, that was good. I was going to say too. One of the things I've noticed too is, as the days get shorter, there certainly is a lot less evapotranspiration happening. Those plants just really aren't taking up as much water when at nighttime as they are during the day. So I always think about that too as a big factor.
So, all right, let's launch into water savings. I use this property right here. So last year there were some new plantings put in, and I'll just kind of go like this. Sorry for the the jittery cam. I know, not ideal,
That's
but
spectacular. That's spectacular
it's
landscape. Wow.
it's a pretty spectacular landscape for sure. And so some new plantings were put in, and my brother said, "Okay, I'm going to bring in an irrigator for this, Stuart. We're going off beehive." And so I just kind of watched this and this is all desktop. Everything we're going to do here from now on about how do we measure water savings. Of course, I know the landscape, inside and out, but I can calculate all this just from, it's all desktop stuff. That's why the lead slide for this, the title slide, was a picture of a PC, and equally easy to do from the phone. Last year, the professional irrigator used 477,000 gallons on this property, and you can see exactly when they took over. is that I had control still in May, and then I don't know what happened in June, but by July it was just like, wow. And the blue, so the gray is last year, under, and I'm just going to say kind of professional, but in the heuristical sense of sort of using rules of thumb to water. And the 2024 is in what is at least a high as ET year, and I think a little higher than last year. I mean, against historical averages, plant water use in the Salt Lake area is running very, very high this year. And I saved 50% and so far. And I'm definitely on track in September to beat that number. Again, I'm the blue. I say this is not me. I mean, I'm not this good. I suppose if I didn't have a CEO job, I could sit around and run the calculations every day and then water correctly at night. But this is just all Beehive doing it in the blue. And so, 50% reduction, I'll just say feeling pretty good, but there's still the question, Richard, did I water more than that ideal point? Was I past the point of positive marginal utility at any point?
Yeah. So first thing I want to say is the savings are just incredible, right? But we see this pretty often where we save 50% of the water, right? When it's not properly managed. This is an unusual number. It's a big savings, but not an unusual number. And number two, I'm just wondering, how's the Thanksgiving conversation going to be this year?
Do you know this year? This year, I think better. But I was also shadowed. I have to say this? I was shadowed by a professional irrigator again this year who would, at certain times, because we had, starting in June, we started hitting 100-degree days periodically. I mean, it was just a really unusual trend to this year. And that when that stress comes early, you just see it in the landscape. And so I got texts. I was in the movie theater, and it said, "Stuart, we're not getting enough water here." And I, I know the data. I'm like, no, we are just hang in there. And finally we get to this point, and I don't think it'll be a painful Thanksgiving discussion. It'll be just like, trust the process. It works, and because there are times when you get really, really hot over sustained days, and where there are weaknesses in the system, you may see some stress. But what I'm going to show you here into how to calculate your savings is, don't let the few stress spots then deter you from maintaining what the science says is the right schedule. Because let me tell you, folks, the science at this point is really, really good. If I can do it in this yard, you can do it in your yard. But I'm not perfect, and that's what I want to show, Richard.
Yeah, so I think you make a good point too, because for a long time we talked about smart controllers and we said, well, they're not, set it and forget it. We had too many people just setting up the smart controllers and ignoring what was happening, maybe not still doing their wet checks, things like that. But in today's world, boy, the irrigation programming's done for you. The run times and the frequency is done for you. You really can just keep an eye on it. You don't have to be in there every day. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. In fact, you shouldn't be in there any day unless you're applying the analytical process I'm going to show you. Or no, I'll leave it at that.
Or just no.
Don't. It's the Conrad Hilton. I don't know if I said this previously, but I'll just repeat it. He reportedly said about how to run a great hotel is, make sure the guests leave the shower curtain inside the bathtub. And I would just say, leave the controller in smart mode. It knows what it's doing. You may need to adjust things specific to the equipment and for specific areas of the landscape, but we can discuss more of that in a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And the last Hilton I stayed in didn't even have a tub anymore. It was just
That's right. They fixed it. They're like, no more water draining down to the next floor.
Okay. No tub with the shower curtain was the smart controller for them.
All right. Do we have questions or coming in, or can we dive deeper?
Yeah, let's dive a little deeper.
Let's go down the rabbit hole here. All right. This then looks at the minutes, and this is irrespective of whether or not you have a flow metering device on your irrigation system. This is a standard report, and it is, so for this day, how many minutes the system ran by zone. All right. If you have a meter installed, a metering device, then there is the additional gallons by zone. But let me just start, and then also every system will show the amount of rainfall, the reference plant water usage, and the reason why that's reference is that there's a specific crop, which is a tall grass, that's used as the reference plant water usage, and there are very sophisticated ways of calculating then the water that's been used under different conditions with that reference crop, that really then has resulted in the ability to calculate the equation that is used for weather-based smart irrigation controllers. All right. And so that's the ETO, or the reference ET value. And then the specific zone plant water usage is specific. For instance, these limelight behind me have a specific ETL. The turf grass does, the boxwood does. And so that can vary according to zone. I've got lots of hybrid zones here. So I tend to use a default. I start with a 0.7 landscape coefficient, and then I adjust down from there. I take 10% off for the fact that not all areas are in full shade. And then I make a little bit of a drought adjustment as well. We're in a really dry area. I don't feel good about, there are parts of this landscape that honestly I let go once I know I'm watering it enough. If I've got a plant type, some of these were brought in and just frankly aren't appropriate for this landscape. And so that's part of probably the tension, the Thanksgiving tension you're talking about with John, is that if it really isn't made to survive in this climate, I really struggle to drive up then the ETL for that specific zone. I try to keep each of these what we call hydrozones, where it's a common water, should be a common water use within it, at a level where it's a reasonable level. And that is a way I get to water savings. And that's back to the point of that Dr. Cope made last week, which is, well, what you choose to plant doesn't, it doesn't all have to be desert plantings. There are lots of good choices now, including in turf, but you have to choose wisely. So let me just take it to there, and then I'm digging from there. We're going deep into these calculations.
Yeah, so I thought you explained that really well, Stuart. So, and if I got it right, if ETO for the week is 1 inch, and I have a plant, let's say a boxwood, which we talked about earlier, that uses 50% of ETO, then that boxwood would need a 1/2 inch this week. Do I have that right?
Correct. Yeah, it's really that simple, and that is what we call a net irrigation. Everything I talk about here, because this property has some micro irrigation, but it's primarily in a combination of sprays and rotors. And so there's then an efficiency factor on that. And so if I'm using, and let me just give an example. So a typical sandy loam soil would have a net irrigation requirement to fill that soil at a 6-inch root zone of 0.33 inches. But to actually get that amount of water into the soil, there's an inherent efficiency in irrigation. The reason why drip is so good is you can achieve 90+% efficiency with drip, well designed and well maintained. Where with sprays and rotors, we use a default of 75%. For sprays, that's a stretch. For rotors, that's really pretty achievable. But for purposes of what we're talking about here, I'm going to talk about efficiency at 75%, which would mean that 0.33 of net irrigation, what I'm saying gets to the actual plant. What actually then has to be applied is 0.44 inches of water. So does that make sense, Richard?
Yeah, because I think that difference between the 0.33 and the 0.44 maybe evaporated before it hit the ground, didn't make it to the root zone, was directed not in the proper area. That's what we're missing, right, in this efficiency.
Correct. And Beehive and other, when I say we're down the rabbit hole, because we're into the inner workings of smart controllers. And so Beehive and other EPA WaterSense controllers work this way without your thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. These are really great concepts, Stuart, that everybody should understand.
Okay, so here's the promise, the calculation. So let's start with then this whole property. This is a top-down look, and you can do this too. Okay, and all you need to do is for your property, go on to Google Earth, and if I won't be brand specific there, but that's a very common one to use that they keep up to date. So whatever mapping software you'd like to use. But if you go on Google Earth, you just click the tape measure and do a quick measurement around the property of the non-hardscape areas. And so I'm showing 10,465 square feet for this property, but then I have to subtract the sidewalks there, and you can see the back patio. If you see that umbrella that's right next to the house, I'm under that right now. It's a 85-degree day with lots of wind though, so I'm not too hot. And then in August, the net ET, and again, this is all available from just right in your smart watering app. Got this from the Beehive app. August was a 9.29 inch reference ET. Folks, that's a big number.
Yeah.
But rainfall was 1.331, a little bit above average. Beneficial rainfall, we take 80% of that. Again, Beehive's all in the background, calculating this. That gives me an ET for the landscape of 4.22. And then my efficiency of 75% gives me then a net irrigation. This is the inches needed of 5.63 inches. Then I multiply that by my 9,465, and that is the 10,465 area minus the 1,000 of other hardscape, right? So that's how I get that square feet. Times it by the magic multiplier for a 75% efficiency of 0.83 gives me 44,229 gallons for the month. And then, Richard, I've got my Zoom thing blocking what it says down there, but can you read for me the actual gallons that were applied at the property?
I'm also being blocked by it, Stuart. I think it's 155,000.
Oh, I can hide it. Hang on. I have the ability here.
There we go. Yeah, I was close. 135,000 gallons last year and 60,000 gallons, 61,000.
But you know what?
Minus 55%.
I'm still not as good as I could be. Okay. Now I can do this using a water bill. All right. Because the water bill will tell me the usage for the month. It will tell me that 60,766. If I'm here on a system that's actually divided. The irrigation water is on a separate, it's non-culinary. There's no backflow prevention on it. So it's on a separate meter from the water that's used in the house, the culinary, the domestic water. So I don't need to worry about, okay, well, how much did I use inside? But if you're on a mixed meter where your irrigation is on the same meter as your indoor water, then what you can do is just look at the months that are your non-irrigating months, and you'll be able to see basically what your domestic usage is and just subtract that from the usage from an August water bill. And that will give you reasonably close, assuming you're not doing massive amounts of car washing and wasting water in your driveway. But that'll give you a pretty close amount of your gallons needed without having to have a separate irrigation meter. If you do have one, though, which we highly recommend, and this is what Richard and I spend most of our time on, because it allows us to get into the weeds here. If you can put on a culinary meter, we love Flume devices. Beehive integrates with Flume, and it does all the tracking of the water used at that meter. It's so smart in its analytics that it will tell you with really good accuracy which part of it was specific to outdoor irrigation, and that goes on any public meter with a magnetometer in it. The one on the right is the actual flow meter that is at this property for the non-culinary system. I have one at mine. This one also has the city or the water district just put one on the secondary meter as well. But this one connects directly to my beehive. So the one on the left, the flume, connects to beehive via the cloud. The one on the right connects via the hard wire that goes into the controllers, and both controllers from Hydrorain in our commercial level and ET Water in all the ET Water controllers allow you to connect up a dedicated water meter, and then all beehive controllers allow you to connect up a flume meter.
Yeah, I have a flume at my home, and
flume sensor.
yeah, I had a flume. I have a flume at my home, and the one thing I was very impressed with, Stuart, is they said to allow about 15 minutes for installation. Now, I don't do any jobs really that only take 15 minutes, right? But it was installed in less than 5. I mean, it is really easy to.
It's rare that's true, but it is. It is. I absolutely agree with that. If you then have that level of accuracy, well, look what I can go do. So on a zone basis, so I'll use zone 1. This is right behind me. This is this turf area right here. It's 792 feet. The application off of my Beehive app for the day, it was 0.28 inches of, there's just where it said in that irrigation line. So that's net irrigation. Then times the 792 square feet that I just quickly calculated there. It just takes minutes to do this, times 0.83, and it's 184 gallons against 173 gallons. You're like, yeah, it's pretty darn good. No change, right?
Yeah.
But if I go out to the other side, the street side of the house, I've got 2 rotor zones, and I actually, and you showed the video on this in one of the webinars where you showed the catch cup analysis, and
Yeah.
I reduced those rotors way down. And you know what? I'm still high, because look at this. It's 2 zones. And so I take the 1,002 feet, the zones spray back toward each other. Okay, so you've got a rotor. You look over there on the left side looking at the screen. That's one zone, the right side, and then they go all the way down on each side. So I take, that's 501 square feet, just half of that, for zone 4, right? Times 0.28 inches, times my 0.83, and it's 116 gallons. And I'm running at 221 still, 18 minutes. So opportunity there, reduced down to 10. So yeah, I'm saving water, especially versus last year. But you know what? In zone 1, I'm kind of where I should be. But in zone 4, I can do a big reduction there. And every time that waters, then it's going to take, quick, Richard, do the math with me, 84 plus 21. I think that's sort of 105.
105, right?
Right. So gallons that I can save just from that one zone, all at my desktop here. Right now, what will happen is if I go down to that level, what I may find, because I'll be right then, you saw in the last one, I was okay because I was about 10 gallons over from where I'd expect it to be. As you get down to this level, you said it the other day, Richard, when we were talking, you said, this is like getting your golf handicap down. It's not it's a big deal for everyone when they break 100, but to get from, in golf, right? To get from 100 to like 80 is monumental improvement. And to get from an 80 to a 79 is like 10 times as hard as getting from 100 to 80. You're just talking about almost something that becomes, logarithmic when you start to get down to gallon level of savings. And so we got to be a little bit, generous and allowing a little bit of latitude here, because you're going to struggle to make your sprinklers absolutely perfect. But when I get it down to this level, reducing to 10 minutes, I probably will need to go out and make some adjustments in the radius throw. These are rotors, so the radius throw, and probably need to look at some nozzling as well. So I may do some arc adjustments and radius adjustments for sure. Obviously, I make nozzle adjustments. I've got to remeasure, because then they'd be at a different GPM. So we're talking really advanced stuff here, folks. But let me just show you then how I applied it, so I won't be a hypocrite in this. As I've been telling you, well, look at me down at my house. I've got that beautiful landscape, and I'm at a 56.7% of ET coefficient, which is really that's really lean. But I'm not perfect. I went through every zone in preparation for this webinar, and just so that I could say to you, I actually do this. I went through every zone in my yard with a tape measure, and then did it on Google just to make sure, Google Earth, just to make sure I was accurate. At 24,010, I'm confident in that number. And then the by zone square footage. And green shows where I'm underwatering, and yellow shows where I'm overwatering. So folks, as good as I am on a daily basis. I can save 1,550 gallons. Now I'll make some adjustments in there because in a property as large as mine, some of those areas are on slopes that are west, in some cases southwest facing. That takes solar radiation to a whole new level. Also changes the exposure to wind. And so I probably can't get to this full level here of 432 minutes versus today's 526 minutes, but I sure can go down. And so I've got some work to do, folks. I would say, how do I know if I'm saving water? I know that I've been careful about selecting my plantings out at J&J. I chose very carefully last year. I've been really, really careful with my irrigation. I installed with my equipment. I installed a flow meter. But when I get down to this level of analysis, there's still work to do. Now, in all honesty, this is what Richard and I do on the commercial side of our business, is that for really large water users, we can save them a lot of water by applying these kind of analytics. But I would just suggest that as Dr. Cope was speaking last week, she was saying they come out and do these, and it's a form of this, but intended to achieve very much the same result. And they do that, as I understood it, Richard, did I understand it's funded by the water districts? It's free?
Yeah, it's free. You can have someone come out and perform this for you, or boy, you just gave a great lesson in how to do this. And either way, right? And doing it yourself is kind of fun if you're of that type.
So, and I know we're getting to time here, and I hope this hasn't been like so wonky that it hasn't felt grounded in reality. This really, there's some education here, and we're building additional features into our software, into our apps all the time to do more and more of this.
Yeah.
But I hope it feels real, and that it feels somewhat accessible. And Richard, you and I would love to teach. These aren't like trade secrets here where we want to be the only people in the world who know how to do this. We'd love this to scale across the world. That's why we call this changing the way the world waters. What do you think, Richard?
Yeah, absolutely, Stuart. I think you did it in a very understandable and practical way that somebody could follow. One of our viewers is making the point that a smart controller combined with good management is really the key. Somebody else was saying, well, do I need to still check my nozzles and sprays? And I think you make a very good point that this is where you're going to make that fine tuning. This is where you're going to get that extra 1,500 gallons of savings. So
can we, Richard, go to the responses on water usage? How much do our viewers know about gallons per minute in different devices?
I would say that maybe they didn't understand the question, because we didn't get very many responses to that at all. But yeah, it is interesting, right? When you start to think that a spray head puts out a full circle, 2 gallons a minute, and 8 on a zone, 16 gallons a minute of water. If you had all full circle, but they do put out a lot of water.
Yep. And so, yeah, it's anywhere on those hose end nozzles, it's 2 to 3 gallons per minute. But when we get up to a large center pivot, 750 to 1,000 gallons per minute. And so it's a really broad range. And even though it looks super low volume in a vineyard environment, zone blocks can be easily 300 GPM, flowing through lots of long lengths of tubing with tiny emitters, but it all adds up. This is really important, Richard, what we're doing in terms of changing the way the world waters. The reason why we really do these webinars is to invite people to join us on this journey. It is a journey. We can apply a lot of technology to it, but the viewer who said that we have to apply good management is absolutely right. There are more smart clocks out there than there is smart irrigation, smart controllers, right? And it's part of our mission is to educate and to elevate. We like to say, right, Richard, is that we like to make bad irrigators good and good irrigators terrific.
Yeah. Yep. And there's a lot of technology to do that. Now we have one last question. I think is it's good. It's more philosophical, but this person's asking, with all the heat island effects that we're seeing in cities right now, it's causing problems. We want to save water, so people are suggesting we reduce landscapes, but heat island effects getting bad. Is there some middle ground here, Stuart? What do you think?
I think there is middle ground. Kelly Cope hit it so well last week when she said, let's fix the irrigation problems. That's really, really low hanging fruit before we disrupt carbon sequestration and use water on new crops or in new plants that in many cases are going to struggle to survive with these kinds of hot summers that we're seeing as they wait to establish a root zone. That's not to disparage the idea of landscape conversion, but I thought Kelly said it very well. Is there's some really low-hanging fruit out there. The urban heat issue is an issue right across the street here, and we're too constrained on time for me to do it. But we were way ahead of the curve. We had a neighbor who put in a rock strip back in the 70s. I helped do that. The home has changed, hands a few times since I grew up. I grew up in this yard, but the home's changed. The home next door has changed hands, and there's now part of it, the part that truly is the furniture part of the strip to the southwest side, still has rock in it, and there's a utility box in it, and it's really appropriate for that. But in front of the house, they decided to go for an aesthetic appeal with turf in that area, no trees, and watered smart. I just don't think that that's where we should hang our hat. I think they've achieved the aesthetic effect that they want. And if you go back and look at my LinkedIn posts, you'll see the heat check I did from the rock strip to then the interior turf in that front lawn, then over to that front strip. And just to look at the temperature differentials where you're off the charts in the rocks, much lower in the inland part of it. And then on that outboard part of the strip face to the street side, still much lower than the rock strip, but of course it's going to be higher. And we just have to be smart about then how we water that and what our expectations are from that parking strip. But I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that this isn't an all or nothing proposition, and that surely we can't be saying that the solution is do you call it the platinum? And I don't want to say that, but it's the home up front, that has no landscape. I do think that with what I've articulated here, there's a lot we can do to have some cake, and to eat it too.
Yeah.
Without going to. I love how people say it instead of zera, which means dry. They say zero scaping, and that's not that just isn't a solution for most people that's going to be an acceptable aesthetic. We can change water with the landscapes we have today. I've shown you the techniques to do it.
Yeah. Hey, I want to tell you, Stuart, I did a property walk a couple weeks ago with somebody who had seen you do that temperature test, the temperature gun test. And they were telling me, I did the temperature gun test with my son over the weekend. We were shocked at what a difference it was between the turf and the asphalt. So I just want you to know your LinkedIn posts are getting attention and making a difference.
All right. Well, we're passionate about this, and it's not obviously the goal of this. These webinars are free. I think we do showcase good products, but the point is again to make bad irrigators good and good irrigators terrific. So
Yeah.
I hope everyone's found this beneficial. And Richard, you and I, our proverbial door, metaphorical door, is open. But if people want to reach out, we are here to help people on the journey to changing the way they water, and so doing to change the way the world waters.
Yep, absolutely, Stuart. Thanks so much for taking us through this. It was very interesting and understandable, very tough subject, but very understandable. So thank you. Thank you to all the viewers for watching today. And remember, as Stuart said, you can see all our webinars at hydrorain.com /webinars, or you can listen to them wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. It's really rewarding to me to know that people are out working and educating at the same time. That's just fantastic when people are doing that. So
thank you, Richard. Richard, are you going to send out to the email list on this? Are you going to let us know who the winner was on that? It may be anonymous, so however you do that. But I'm excited. Congratulations to whomever Richard deemed submitted the best question.
We had great questions today, Stuart. There was a total of 19. And look, we're going to have multiple winners because there were great questions, and be reaching out to you for where you want your prize mailed to. So look for that email from me. Again, thank you, Stuart. Thanks, everybody. We're on a quiet week next week, but week after that, we're going to be back with Eric Santos to talk about how to spot what regular challenges you're going to see in your drip zones and what to do about them.
Eric is terrific. If you like today's, you'll love the next one with Eric.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Thanks again, Stuart. Thanks, everybody.
See you, everyone.
Bye now.